When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 so your chimneys I sweep, and in suit I sleep. There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head, that curled like a lamb's back, was shaved, so I said, Hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the suit cannot spoil your white hair. And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was a-sleeping, he had such a sight, that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing, they run, and wash in a river and shine in a sun. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom, if he be a good boy, he have God for his father and never want joy. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark, and got with our bags and brushes to work. Though morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm, so if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. The Chimney Sweeper is two different poems presented in both the Songs of Innocence and the Songs of Experience. The Chimney Sweeper, written by Blake, in the children's book Songs of Innocence, presents us with the narrator, a young chimney sweeper. The boy that narrates the story did not have a choice in becoming a chimney sweeper, like the majority of the young chimney sweepers in Europe. As stated by Benita Cullingford in the book British Chimney Sweeps, towards the end of the 16th century, justices were given power to apprentice the children of the poor. Even though the object of apprenticeship was to provide an immediate maintenance of the child in return for its labor, poor orphans or illegitimate children typically were stuck with less desirable apprenticeships, such as chimney sweeping. Cullingford also states that the chimney sweeping trade, in common with other trades during the Industrial Revolution, had an abundance of masters who ill-treated their apprentices. Looking back now, there is no doubt that in society's mind, this type of treatment of children is cruel. The culture then was so used to child labor, they thought nothing of it. However, Blake was very bitter toward a society that tolerated such exploitation of the boys characterized in this poem. The Chimney Sweeper. William Blake wrote The Chimney Sweeper, presented in the Songs of Innocence, as a demand to action from the upper class for the treatment and care of the poor children in Europe's society.
The poem The Chimney Sweeper has a lot of different underlying themes to it, but one of the main ones is a call to action to the upper class. In this point in history, when William Blake wrote this poem, the chimney sweepers were boys who had been pretty much abandoned and orphaned, who were living on the streets, and their entire role in society was to simply sweep people's chimneys, and then after that they were done. All they had was to sleep on the streets. So this poem is a call to action to the upper class, presenting the situation as if they had turned a blind eye to it.
The 19th century was filled with poverty and suffering. One simply couldn't be in the city and not see those in need. There was a constant struggle to manage life and survive in Europe during this time. Fortunately, society has evolved immensely since the Romantic era. This change can be contributed in part to the poets that emerged. During these rough times, Romantic poets who rose through their search of purpose and meaning of life. William Blake endured many hardships throughout his life. In the culture Blake grew up in, boys became apprentices for masters at a young age, where they were extensively trained in the field they were placed in. Blake became an apprentice to an engraver at the age of 14. Even though he worked with an engraver, he had a love for art that went far beyond his work as an apprentice. He began experimenting with relief etching, which he called illuminated printing. As stated in the Norton Anthology, to read a Blake poem without the picture is to miss something important. Blake places words and images in a relationship that is sometimes mutually enlightening and sometimes turbulent, and that relationship is an aspect of the poem's argument. In this mode of relief etching, he published Songs of Innocence and then added supplementary poems and printed Songs of Experience.
And William Blake, along with many other political poets, whenever the society and the city is mentioned, it is a representative of darkness and evil, and corruption, because at this time that's where all of that evil was happening in the city, especially considering the situation with the chimney sweepers. So when we were introduced to the speaker and Tom, they're living in the city, which is a very clear representative of how William Blake feels about it. He feels that it is wrong, and the situation that they're in is it's wrong, and that it should be fought for. And taking the situation from the city into the nature, into the countryside with the river and the sun, that is showing how he views it can be fixed. When we were first introduced to the poem, we know that the speaker is a chimney sweeper, but we're never aware of his name. His name is never given, and that is symbol of how society looked at him, because his name was not important. But in the poem, the speaker makes sure that he gives his fellow chimney sweepers names. He gives names such as Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, and of course Tom. Tom, in the poem, he is the boy who has the dream, and in this dream he dreams that he is in a coffin of black, and an angel comes with a key of light and unlocks him and sets them free, and they get to run and jump and laugh and play in a green plain, and then they get to wash in a river and lay in the sun. And this is a pretty big deal for them, because as chimney sweepers they're always covered in soot, and they're always dark and black, and they're never clean. And also because they live on the street, they're not clean, because they have nowhere to be clean and they have no one taking care of them. So the fact that the speaker gives the names of all of his fellow chimney sweepers, yet never gives his name, it shows how, even though to society they don't mean anything, each other they mean everything.
He is known to do whatever he wants when it comes to rhyme and meter, and it is perfectly accepted because he is William Blake. However, the rhyme and meter is an important part of every poem. The rhyme scheme in this poem is very interesting, but of course it is. Blake wrote it. In the first 4 stanzas, Blake uses couplets, which are 2 sets of lines that rhyme consecutively. An example of this would be the 3rd stanza. And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was a-sleeping, he had such a sight, that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. Alternately, in the last 2 stanzas, Blake moves to slant rhyme, which takes the sound of a poem from very sing-songy rhyme to a different, more strange rhyme. The last 2 stanzas sound different. An example of this is the last stanza. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark, and got with our bags and brushes to work. The morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm, so if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. The meter of the poem is pretty uniform throughout the poem. Blake uses anapaestic iambic tetrameter, which means that there are 4 beats per line, and there are also 4 lines per stanza. Although most of the poem follows this pattern, it is not always perfect. For example, in the 3rd stanza, when Blake includes a list of names of the other chimney sweepers, that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, there are more than 4 beats in this line.
The chimney sweeper has a lot of onomatopoeia in it, especially in the 1st stanza. The 1st stanza reads, "When my mother died I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry. Weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep." The interesting part about this is the onomatopoeia occurs in the weep, 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 weep. Although it's not simply weep. The weep has an apostrophe in front of it, signifying that there was supposed to be a letter before. So this onomatopoeia points to the fact that the boy was so young that not only was he crying as a child normally does, but also that he was not to the age that he could say sweep, which is what his job is. So he is so young, and his role in life is to sweep chimneys and live on the street, yet he's not even old enough, and he can't even pronounce what his job is, what his role in life is. We can tell that the Chimney Sweeper in Songs of Innocence is a romantic poem because of the different aspects he uses. First one is nature. William Blake uses nature to to signify freedom and the innocence and the joy. When Tom is in his dream, he is in nature. He's in a green field where he gets to laugh and play, and he gets to wash in the creek and lay in the sun. And that's not something that he usually gets to do, because as Tom being a chimney sweeper, he sweeps chimneys and he's in the city. An important aspect of romanticism is the city versus the countryside. In the last stanza of the poem, it is all about how Tom wakes up. He has this wonderful dream where this angel sets him free, and they get to have fun, and they're free to be just innocent and fun little boys. But then he wakes up to the realization of what his life is like and where he is. But when he wakes up, he gets his stuff and he gets ready for work. Although, even though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm, because he had this reassurance and this joy and this hope that even though it was so hard, that if he did his duty, that he would be safe, even though it is his duty that would kill him.
When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 so your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head, that curled like a lamb's back, was shaved, so I said, hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was asleeping, he had such a sight, that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing, they run, and wash in a river and shine in the sun. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never one joy. And so Tom awoke, and he rose in the dark, and got with our bags and brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm, so if all do their duty, they need not fear harm.